Many of you may already know or have seen videos about this case, however there should hopefully be new information for you to enjoy. The Kersey time-slip is one of the best known examples of the time-slip phenomenon, and I will begin by giving a brief description of what this phenomenon entails. For those who are unaware of this phenomenon, and to put this video into context, time-slips are a paranormal event during which people, either on their own or as a group, inexplicably travel through time by unknown means and for unknown reasons. This is one such case. On a clear October morning in 1957, 3 Royal Navy cadets took part in an orienteering exercise, the aim of which was to locate certain waypoints and then to return to base camp, noting what they had found along the way so that their superiors would know whether or not they had been on the correct path. The team consisted of 15-year-olds Michael Crowley from Worcestershire, Ray Baker from London and William Lane from Perthshire in Scotland. It was a pretty standard exercise, with other groups no doubt on similar expeditions throughout the Suffolk area. Along the way, the 3 cadets climbed a hill and came across a small village situated at the base, with whiffs of smoke billowing from some of the houses, a church whose spire they could clearly see upon approach, and church bells ringing in the background. It should be noted that the boys had been accompanied throughout their journey by constant birdsong and wildlife chatter. This was all the more apparent once they had entered the village of Kersey. This came to light many years later due to recollections made for an interview with Andrew Mackenzie, a leading member of the Society for Psychical Research. The autumn trees of that October morning were now replaced with bright green foliage as if it was spring or summertime, and the church tower that they had earlier seen from atop the hill had since vanished. The only living things the boy could see were some ducks in a nearby stream. However, things were not as they seemed, for their unease was exacerbated by a complete silence, for not only were the ducks as well as the very stream completely silent, but so too were the church bells they had heard earlier. The background chatter of the birds that had accompanied them had now completely disappeared. Despite the foreboding feeling they were all experiencing, they pressed onward and came upon a huge house with dark and dirty windows, which they peered into only to see oxen carcasses hung up and covered in what appeared to be green mould. It was as if they were peering into an abandoned butcher shop. Cobwebs laced the windows, and once again there was not a living soul in sight. It was almost as if the inhabitants had simply dropped everything they were doing and ran off, never to return. The boys also noticed that there was no furniture within the buildings, and the place had seemed to have been left abandoned for some time. It has to be said at this point that Kersey is a very old village within the UK, with many of the buildings and much of the layout remaining largely as it had been since medieval times. And indeed, the village itself can trace its roots back to at least the Saxon times from which the name derives, Car-Sy, with Car being the old Saxon name for stream and Sy being the old Saxon name for ditch. This came due to a stream that passes through the village with a small footbridge off to the side for pedestrians to cross over. It's also famous for its picturesque qualities and is known for being the quintessential picture postcard English village. The boys' sense of unease grew as they felt an icy cold chill pass through them, and with that a sense that they were constantly being watched by unseen eyes, and though they did briefly consider knocking on one of the village doors, the overbearing sense of dread drove them off such that they headed back up the main street, glancing back only briefly to see whether they had been followed. Lane would go on to say during his discussions with Andrew Mackenzie, "It was a ghost village, so to speak. It was almost as if we had walked back in time. I experienced an overwhelming feeling of sadness and depression in Kersey, but also a feeling of unfriendliness and unseen watchers which sent shivers up one's back. I wondered if we'd knocked at a door to ask a question who might have answered it. It doesn't bear thinking about." However, once they'd started to make their way back up, they noticed the smoke once again billowing from the chimneys, as well as the church tower that had greeted them on arrival having now suddenly reappeared off into the distance, church bells ringing. Upon returning back to base camp, the trio described what they had seen as well as the eeriness of the experience within the village, though their superiors were rather sceptical of their accounts and put it down to the picturesque medieval vibe of the place itself. This, according to them, was the whole point of the exercise, and the cadets had passed the test with flying colours. Fast forward to the late 1980s and early 90s, when Lang and Crowley decided to get in touch due mainly to the experiences that they had on that October morning in 1957. Lang, who as mentioned earlier heralded from Perthshire in Scotland, but had since moved to Australia in the 1990s, later admitted to his friend that their brief encounter with the village all those years ago had been troubling him, and that he wanted to hear the perspectives of those of his companions at the time. It transpired that Crowley, who had also since moved to Australia, didn't remember as much as Lang about their encounter. However, he did remember the eerie silence and the lack of modern day technology within the village, as well as the butcher shop. Unfortunately, the third cadet, Ray Baker, could remember nothing of that day. With his newfound impetus from Crowley, Lang decided to arrange a meeting with Andrew Mackenzie of the Society for Psychical Research, who was writing his book Adventures in Time from 1997, whereupon they visited upon the very village that was at the centre of this entire mystery. Mackenzie had, during the course of his investigation on the case, later discovered that the house that they had visited on that fateful day was by 1957 a private residence and had come to be known throughout the area as Bridge House and Riverside House, which is all the more fitting seeing as it would later come to signify a kind of bridge between this reality and that of another. This in itself would rule out any possibility of there having been ox carcasses strewn around the front room. However, Mackenzie had also discovered that from as far back as 1790, there had been documented proof that the house had been a butcher shop and possibly for even longer. Indeed, according to the website britishlistedbuildings.co.uk, it mentions that the house had a dedicated shop bay with glazing bars which still exist to this very day, something the boys wouldn't have known back in 1957 unless they'd spoken to one of the locals. The Bridge House is probably of 15th to 16th century origin, a timber-framed and plastered building with a tiled roof. Cross wings at the north and south ends, renovated. The timber framing is exposed on the north side of the north cross wing, 2 stories. The windows are partly casements and partly double-hung sashes with vertical glazing bars. The north cross wing has a small 18th to 19th century shop bay with glazing bars. The south cross wing has a doorway. So why is this an example of a time slip, and what can we discover about the case? Firstly, we have to bear in mind that these cadets were orienteering. Orienteering by definition is a group of sports that require navigational skills, using a map and compass to navigate from point to point in diverse and usually unfamiliar terrain whilst moving at speed. Participants are given a topographical map, usually a specially prepared orienteering map which they use to find control points. Originally a training exercise in land navigation for military officers, orienteering has developed many variations. As such, these cadets were purposefully looking out for their surroundings in the hope of identifying any landmark on their map, and as such we should give greater credence to their account of what they saw within the village than someone, say, especially given that they were 15 at the time, who happened to be doing nothing other than passing through. On top of this, we need to identify the topographical layout of the village itself, for in doing so we can better come to a conclusion as to the authenticity of the story. If we acknowledge that the boys approached Kersey from the north side as well as accept that the village has remained largely unchanged since the Middle Ages, then we can more or less see exactly what the boys saw and indeed what could be seen during medieval times using Google Maps. From the top of the hill facing south into Kersey, we can quite easily see the top of St Mary's Church from afar. The boys saw the church as they approached and could also hear the church bells. However, upon entering the village, they noted that the church was nowhere to be seen and that the sounds that accompanied them had suddenly disappeared. It should also be noted that the church can also be seen from outside Bridge House, the very house that the cadets saw as a butcher shop. It can also be said that the church can become partially obscured by the surrounding houses at ground level, but it nevertheless maintains the most prominent position within the whole village due to its placement high up on the opposite hill to where the cadets originally saw it, with everything else lying at its feet to the north and with only agricultural land to its south, west and east. It would thus be very difficult not to have seen the church back in 1957. Then there is the mystery behind Bridge House. By 1990, the house was occupied as a private residence by a Mrs. Julian Finch and a Miss Gladys King, who confirmed that it had previously been a butcher shop by at least 1905, meaning that it had not been in operation in that capacity for at least 50 years from the time the cadets first stumbled upon it. It should also be noted that nothing remained on the house exterior or interior that suggested it had been a butcher shop by 1957, with the only suggestion that it had been a shop being the aforementioned shop bay with glazing bars remaining to this very day. Indeed, as Alberto Miatello in his essay on why the Kersey Village case is an impressive timeslip states, how could 15-year-old boys occasionally visiting and quickly passing by a location they never saw before, and obviously having no interest at all in investigating the history of that village, and even less the history of a specific building, know that more than 50 years before, the building near the stream was a butcher shop? Next is the mystery surrounding the church itself, which may not directly impact this particular case, but which serves to add more mystery to an already mysterious event. The oldest parts of the church date back to the 12th century, with the north aisle having been completed by 1335. Work had then been started on the tower but was halted due to the outbreak of the Black Death in 1349. It would not be until over 100 years later that the tower would be completed in 1481. Now, the mystery surrounding this derives from the fact that the entrance to the modern-day church is to the south side rather than the north. The problem being that the entrance should have been on the side that faces the village, however the entrance faces farmland. Why would the church entrance be on the opposite side to where the primary congregation lay? According to the Suffolk Church's website, it states, "The north door faces the village, but the main entrance into the church is through the flushwork of the south porch, one of Suffolk's best, as at Boxford, where the grand south porch is also on the wrong side of the church." The carvings in the spandrels are curious. One appears to show a tree with two fish, the other an entwined foliage crown. Why build such a fine structure on the south rather than the north? Perhaps it was because there was already a good north porch when the late medieval donor chose to contribute a grand new one. But Simon Cotton suggests another theory. Perhaps it was intended, not for the villagers, but for the visitors to the shrine of Our Lady of Kersey. It has been argued that the cadets had somehow entered into a time slip and experienced Kersey as it had been during the Black Death, so between 1335 and 1481, when the tower was finally completed. This would explain why they couldn't see the church tower once they'd entered into the village, but then could see one again once they'd left. It's often been claimed that because Kersey has changed very little over the years, that the cadets simply believed that they had travelled back in time. However, we should also consider that two of the cadets possibly came from rural backgrounds, Crowley from Worcestershire and Laing from Scotland. Indeed, parts of Worcestershire had been the inspiration for Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings book. And likewise, Laing hailed from rural Scotland, where old-fashioned villages would not have been completely alien to him. Lastly is Mackenzie's view that this was an example of an hallucinatory account. Much of Andrew Mackenzie's work centres on the prevalence of hallucinations, not least because of his background in psychiatry. Its use has been referenced in his books from poltergeist and ghosts to time slips and crisis apparitions. But what do you guys think? Did those cadets actually enter into a time slip and visit the village of Kersey from 1335 to 1481? Or was it all a figment of their imagination? Please comment below in the videos. Also, if you would like to support the channel, comment, like and subscribe. Until next time, thank you so much. Goodbye.